Hello, my name is Doris, and I am 35 years old. 6 years ago, I married my husband Mason, who is 3 years my senior. My life changed significantly when my beloved father passed away from an illness, leaving behind a substantial inheritance. I invested this inheritance in purchasing a new house, which I cherish dearly. The fresh scent of wood in this house is comforting, and I often think about how proud my father would be to see it. Previously, my father lived alone in our old house, a mere 10-minute walk from our apartment, after my mother passed away and I moved out. A few years ago, my father suffered a fall and passed away not long after. With the inheritance, I made the difficult decision to demolish our old family home and build a new one in its place. I believe that while the structure of the old house is no longer there, the joyful memories we made will forever reside in our hearts. Mason often quoted my father about the significance of building a new home as a fresh start. Initially, I thought he was trying to comfort me, but it soon became clear that was not the case. One evening, Mason abruptly asked me to fill out and submit divorce papers. Confused, I asked him what he meant. He bluntly stated that we were getting a divorce and that the new home, built with my father's inheritance, was intended for his mistress, with whom he planned to live. I was shocked to learn of his infidelity. He admitted to having an affair for about 9 months. He described his mistress as charming, kind, and genuinely in love with him, a stark contrast to how he described our relationship. Mason claimed that coming home to me was always unpleasant and declared his intention to take the house as alimony, arguing that our childless 6-year marriage had no further benefits for him. Distraught, I sought comfort from Mason, but was met with blame instead. He accused me of being responsible for his actions, asserting that my demeanor pushed him toward his affair and eventual decision to leave. He handed me an envelope containing $12,000, calling it my alimony, and told me to be grateful as he planned to take the new house. Overwhelmed by his betrayal yet composed, I returned the envelope to him, refusing the money. The house, built with memories and inheritance meant to be a sanctuary, had become the center of a heartbreaking revelation. I agreed to the divorce, stating plainly, "If you don't love me anymore, there's no point in us staying married. I don't need the money." Mason seemed surprised by how readily I accepted the end of our marriage. With a nod, he warned, "Well, if you say so, just don't ask for it back later." Within a few days, he had packed up his belongings and left, taking the keys to our newly built house with him. However, shortly after he moved out, Mason frantically called me, his voice tense with panic. "What did you do? The police showed up at the house talking about warrants and charges of trespassing. What's going on?" According to him, the police had barged in while he was with his mistress, demanding to know if they understood the legality of their actions. "We're here because you entered this house with a stolen key, which is both theft and trespassing. Do you understand that?" the officers explained. Mason, shocked and confused, turned to his mistress, who was just as bewildered. "Isn't this your house? You said you wanted to show me?" she murmured. "Be quiet and stay out of this," he snapped as one officer interrupted. "Sorry to disrupt, but we need to handle this at the station." Caught between the police and his mistress, Mason called me in desperation. "Why is this happening all of a sudden? What did you do?" "I haven't done much," I replied calmly. "I simply reported that my house keys were stolen and that strangers were in my home. It's only natural to call the police. I had already filed the divorce papers, reverted to my maiden name Doris, and reported the situation." "This is my house, Mason," I continued, standing firm. "Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony?" he argued. "I never agreed to that," I countered. "It's convenient for you to twist things to fit your narrative." "Are you joking? How can you think that house is yours? I'm the one on the house contract. I paid for it with my inheritance from my father. Plus, I own the land," I stated definitively. "But your father said it was for us," Mason protested weakly. "That was when you were my husband. Now we're divorced and practically strangers. Why would you think it's your land?" I replied sharply. My father had wisely transferred the land rights to me when he fell ill, to prevent any complications if something happened to him. Perhaps he foresaw something like this, which might be why he advised demolishing the old house and building a new one. It was clear to me now, more than ever, that money and property could easily become points of contention. When I agreed to the divorce, Mason's usually calm demeanor started to make sense to me. "So, you planned this all along," I realized. He defensively replied, "I did nothing wrong. You've misunderstood everything from the start." It was almost comical to see him so clueless, thinking he would be happy with his mistress. "Stop being ridiculous," I retorted. "You blame me for the affair, the divorce, and losing the house. How does it feel now, being caught between your girlfriend and the police?" Mason could only muster a groan in response, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Hating me as misguided, "This mess is entirely what you're doing. Ever heard of you reap what you sow? This is what you deserve." At that moment, Mason's anger erupted, and he began shouting accusations over the phone, but suddenly his voice was interrupted. "Excuse me, are you Mr. Gold's ex-wife? He's causing a disturbance at your house. Could we have a word, please?" A police officer had taken over the call. I took a moment to explain the situation to the officer, who sympathized with how difficult this must have been for me. Later on, Mason and his mistress were taken to the police station. Mason insisted that the house was a gift from me and claimed it wasn't a case of trespassing. His mistress, genuinely surprised, stated she had no idea they were trespassing. Mason tried to support his claims with so-called evidence at the station, but ultimately the mistress's statement was found credible, and she was released with just a warning. Mason, however, was found guilty of theft and trespassing and received a fine. The issue then arose that Mason had named me as his guarantor upon his release, probably because he didn't want his strict parents to find out. The officer, clearly exasperated, relayed this information to me. "Why should I be his guarantor? We're divorced and practically strangers now," I replied firmly. "I have no connection with Mr. Gold anymore, so I refuse. He has parents nearby. Please contact them." The officer informed Mason, who was visibly frustrated. His parents, who were already aware of our divorce due to his infidelity, were not yet informed of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had brought them fully up to speed on the situation. Reluctantly, after his parents requested more details, I visited Mason's parents' house. When I knocked on the door and started to explain, his mother immediately cut me off. "No need to apologize," his mother said. "It's all my foolish son's fault. But did you know about this?" "About what?" I inquired. "Well, my son is here with his mistress, a much younger woman," she revealed. We allowed them into the living room to discuss the situation. To my astonishment, Mason had brought his mistress along, creating a tense atmosphere. The living room scene unfolded with Mason, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Russell. "Russell, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay," I greeted them. "Doris, thanks for coming," Russell responded. "I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Mason's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side?" I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Mason and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. "What were you thinking, trying to take Doris's new house? Are you insane?" Russell demanded of Mason. "It's not that simple," Mason interjected. "Resolved how? Is that even possible?" Russell retorted, clearly frustrated. "Your story is completely different from hers." Apparently, Mason had spun his version of events before I arrived. "What were you told?" I asked. Russell explained. "He claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest." "Really? He said that?" I was incredulous. "It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object, but that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it, it's beyond comprehension." "I'm so sorry, Doris, for having such a son," Mason's mother apologized. "What are you saying, Mom? I'm telling the truth." Doris wasn't agreeing. She was too stunned to speak, Mason argued. "How could you misunderstand and still claim to be her husband?" I nodded in agreement with Russell. Despite everything, Mason continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied. How can you say that? Were you spending a lot on her? Mason asked, gesturing towards his mistress. No, why would you think that? I responded. Right after our divorce, I happened to run into one of your colleagues. When I mentioned the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling, I continued. Mason's colleague had looked uncomfortable during our conversation. No offense, but I thought it might happen, the colleague had said. What do you mean? Didn't he tell you? I asked the colleague. Shifting uncomfortably, the colleague finally spilled everything, revealing details that I should have known sooner. I wasn't initially aware of the full extent of Mason's actions, but a conversation with one of his colleagues soon brought everything to light. Mason had been openly bragging about his mistress, a woman 15 years his junior, lavishing her with expensive bags and jewelry. He boasted about his plans, even sharing that he intended to divorce me to marry his mistress, capitalizing on her recent inheritance from her deceased father to build a new house. He said, once the house is built, I'll divorce Doris and somehow claim it, no matter the opposition. I'll get it, and then my young new wife and I will live in the big house, the colleague recounted. It seemed the house built with my father's inheritance was not just a home, but a grand gesture intended for his proposal to her. Hearing this, I confronted Mason. I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong? I asked, my frustration evident. Mason, visibly flustered, attempted to justify his actions. Well, yes, I bought her gifts, so what? I used my own money and gave Doris her living expenses. She's not my destined partner, this woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage. His parents, present during this confession, reacted with shock. However, the most astonishing response came from the mistress herself. Marry you? Did I ever say that? We're not even dating, she declared. What do you mean? Mason asked, bewildered. Exactly that, she replied firmly. I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that kind of arrangement, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now, what are you talking about? That's creepy, she stated. Mason went pale, stunned by her revelation. At that point, I asked her, so why did you come here with him today? The mistress explained. I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it was an affair, and I was prepared to pay the alimony, but I'm still a student. A student? How old are you? Russell, Mason's father, interjected, looking bewildered. I lost my parents early and have been engaging in sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses, she confessed. This revelation turned the entire room silent, leaving everyone to digest the depth of deception and the surprising turn of events. As the discussion unfolded, the mistress clarified her financial situation, indicating she didn't have savings to immediately start paying the alimony. I've just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary, she explained. So you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony? I asked. Yes, that's right, she confirmed. Mason, who had been silently listening, suddenly erupted in anger. Didn't you hear her? Unfortunately, she never intended to marry or even date you, but that's separate from the alimony you owe, I pointed out, trying to steer the conversation back to the matter at hand. What about saying you wanted a house? Mason challenged the mistress. I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you, she replied, clarifying her intentions. Mason exclaimed in disbelief. I was suddenly taken to that house thinking it was yours. Then the police came and I learned it was your wife's. The mistress bowed deeply to me, indicating her respect and acknowledging that all of this confusion was spurred by Mason's misunderstandings. All right, I said, seeing an opportunity to resolve at least one issue. If you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment, but promise me, no more sugar dating. It might not end simply next time. I promise I'll never do it again, she said earnestly. Turning to Mason, I addressed the financial aspects of our separation. Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay. Alimony? What are you talking about? Mason asked, taken aback and not expecting to pay alimony himself. You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money, I reminded him. I gave you $12,000 and now you're asking for more? That's not what we agreed on, Mason protested. I don't recall any agreement, I replied. You returned the $12,000 I gave you, saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $30,000, I clarified. And you're also at fault for not having children in the 6 years we were married, Mason suddenly accused, changing the subject. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. Someone asked, "What are you doing, Mason?" He held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. Are you serious? Do you think her inability to have children is her fault? I asked, incredulous at his audacity. Enough with your jokes, Dad, Mason's father interrupted, turning to him. Don't tell me you're blaming Doris for your affair, too. Well, that's how it is, Mason said defiantly. I should have never married her. It's like fraud. How could you think that? I challenged him. Your parents wanted grandchildren. If she couldn't get pregnant, they thought it was better to split up. That's why I chose her. If you truly believe that, Mason's father said, visibly disappointed, then we must have raised you wrong. It took your mother 8 years to conceive you. Mason's mother, Deborah, had endured 8 long years of intense fertility treatments before Mason was born. The strain and heartache of watching others easily start families while she struggled were immense. Now, as she listened to the unfolding drama, tears streamed down her cheeks, a silent witness to the pain revisited by her son's actions. Mason's father, Russell, deeply disappointed, finally said, "Leave this house now." Mason, clearly bewildered, asked, "Why? You're a long-awaited son and I can't bear to look at you now," Russell responded with heavy sadness in his voice. "Don't come back until you truly understand your mistakes." "But where should I go?" Mason asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "Back to our apartment?" I interjected. "That apartment has already been canceled. With the new house, there was no need to keep it. I canceled it right after reporting it to the police. You have no place to return to." Mason was visibly shaken, realizing he had nowhere to go. In his frustration, he turned his blame toward his mistress. "It's your fault. All the money is spent, and now you say you never intended to marry me? It's fraud." She remained calm and responded, "I was clear about it being a sugar relationship from the start. I never asked for money or gifts. If you want to sue, go ahead, but I have proof of our arrangement." "And don't forget the alimony," I chimed in, seeing Mason flustered. "Wait, please wait," he stammered. Ignoring his plea, I contacted his parents to inform them of the situation and then left their house. Later, I hired a lawyer and sent a demand letter for the alimony. Knowing Mason no longer lived at his parents' house, I made sure it wasn't sent there. "Why is it being sent here?" the receptionist at Mason's workplace asked, puzzled as she looked at the letter. "It's possible to send such documents to both residential and employment addresses," I explained. "Is this what this is about?" she inquired, noticing Mason's pale, shaken demeanor. "Yes," I confirmed. "I just told the truth. No one asked me to keep quiet. It's his own doing." The arrival of the demand letter at Mason's workplace quickly spread the news about his actions, including his involvement in sugar dating. This revelation sparked a wider discussion among his colleagues, casting a shadow over his professional reputation. After a series of embarrassing losses and being unable to cope with the whispers and rumors, Mason decided to resign from his job, insisting that he was leaving on his terms. His difficulties didn't stop there. He sought out free legal advice, convinced that he was a victim of marriage fraud. However, the legal advisor was not encouraging. "We've seen cases like yours, but based on the evidence you've provided, this isn't considered fraud. You initially agreed to a sugar relationship," the advisor explained. "If you develop feelings later on, that was on your part alone. You can sue if you wish, but it's likely just a waste of money." Heeding the advice, Mason chose not to file the lawsuit. Feeling defeated, he later confided in me, regretting his past actions. I don't know what I was thinking. I didn't realize how significant you were, even after 6 years together. I promise I'll make you happy this time and won't let myself be distracted by others," he pleaded earnestly. However, his plea did not move me. My decision was firm. "I refuse," I replied sharply. "Why, after all this begging?" he persisted. Over those 6 years, I had come to recognize that Mason was not a good person. He blamed everything on me, tried to take what was mine, and then shamelessly returned after losing everything, expecting reconciliation. What benefit would there be for me to reunite with someone so selfish? I questioned. Mason protested. "You don't have to put it that way. You once said the same things to me." Nonetheless, I was resolute. "Never contact me again," I stated firmly, aware of his current predicament. I then hung up, deleted all his contact information, and changed my phone number. A few days later, an unexpected incident occurred. "Your ex-husband came to the house the other day," one of the neighbors informed me. "We had to chase him away after he caused a disturbance." What was he thinking? I wondered aloud, shocked. The neighborhood ladies, familiar with the situation, had even pretended to call the police to scare him off. Since then, I haven't seen him and am unsure of his whereabouts or his current situation, but I'm confident that he isn't leading a happy life.